I think that this idea that Erdogan is simply going to rubber stamp Sweden and Finland's entry into NATO, I think the prospects of that are starting to fade. And unless there's a real effort made over the next few weeks to try to win him round, and that may require some practical concessions, that may not prove possible. Now, that's not just Erdogan that the United States at this critical moment seems to be, the relations with him, the United States seems to be mismanaging. We've also seen a speech by Secretary Blinken about China. And Secretary Blinken said all kinds of things about China, but he went on to say that China remains for the United States the primary adversary, the country that is apparently the greatest threat to this rules-based international order, which the United States believes itself the leader of. And the Chinese are already, I think, by now, deeply mistrustful of this administration. And of course, hearing what Blinken is saying, and this coming after President Biden's extraordinary maladroit comments about the US defending Taiwan, comments which have been to some extent walked back by members of his administration, but which undoubtedly the Chinese think is a Freudian slip. In other words, a slip which basically says what the real policy of the United States is. Well, all of that is going to make the Chinese especially angry and especially concerned and increasingly convinced that sooner or later the United States is going to come into conflict with China over Taiwan, and that China needs to prepare for that fact. And then, of course, we have a increasing escalating situation between the United States and Iran. We've seen oil tankers being seized, this at a time of energy shortages, of an oil crisis, of oil price increases around the world. Well, the United States seizes tankers. Iran now retaliates by seizing 2 Greek tankers. The United States has refused to change its designation of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization, something which the Iranians had said was an absolute indispensable precondition for the signing off of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the new nuclear deal. So it looks as if that deal, the nuclear deal, is itself now in perhaps terminal crisis. All of this going on. And of course, at the same time, the Iranians are busy, just as the Chinese are busy, buying Russian oil, carrying out military drills with the Russians, Russian aircraft and Chinese aircraft over the Sea of Japan. The Iranians, of course, are now pressing forward to integrate their payment systems, their national payment systems, with the Russian payment system. And there's talk of a Iranian-Russian deal, economic deal, coming on top of the Chinese deal, which the Iranians and the Russians, the Iranians and the Chinese have already signed off on. And of course, at a time when Russia's economy is in deflation, I get to do a program about that, which you can watch on Locals very shortly if you want to sign up on Locals. There's possible talk of linking the Iranian currency to the ruble, which might actually, with further economic linkages, perhaps just conceivably start to bring Iranian inflation under control as well. Well, we'll talk about that in another program. But anyway, all of this going on, the United States is bogged down, is facing a confrontation with Russia in Ukraine, in effect a proxy war. It's looking for confrontation with China. It seems to be drifting into a confrontation with Iran. There are now stories circulating that Argentina is now thinking of joining the BRICS group. This is this group of Russia, China, Brazil, India and South Africa, that Saudi Arabia apparently and Argentina apparently definitely, but apparently Saudi Arabia is also now thinking about joining the BRICS. In other words, joining up with this Chinese and Russian-led international grouping. It seems to me that the administration is, in effect, looking for fights everywhere with everyone. Even relations between Britain, the United States' most important ally, and the United States, the administration itself, are not what they perhaps optimally could be. There's even reports circulating in Britain that the administration is now threatening to limit intelligence cooperation with Britain if Britain doesn't toe the line on the Northern Ireland Protocol, this issue that exists between Britain and the European Union. It gives me the impression of an administration that reacts viscerally to every problem. It doesn't sit down, it doesn't calculate, it doesn't decide on priorities, it certainly doesn't negotiate in earnest. It has visceral feelings about Russia, visceral feelings about China, visceral feelings about Iran, even visceral feelings about Britain and Ireland, and instead of sitting down and thinking them through, it just follows those feelings and gets itself, as I said, into fights with just about everybody. Certainly, the Turkey, Finland, Sweden thing could have, in my opinion, have been handled much better. As Erdogan, in effect, has said, he's not 100% decided against agreeing to Finland and Sweden joining NATO. He's not saying that he will veto Finland and Sweden's applications to join NATO, irrespective of what happens. What he has said is he's got certain concerns about the Kurds that he wants addressed. And he wants also signs from the United States that it is taking Turkey seriously, that it's going to provide Turkey with these F-16 fighter jets, that it's going to do all those sort of things. And the fact that the administration, even on such an important issue, isn't prepared to sit down with the Turks and agree upon that, shows the extent to which this is an administration that simply doesn't do diplomacy, doesn't calculate, as I said, doesn't assess priorities. One would have thought that at this time, given the commitment, the decision, unwise though it was, to have Finland and Sweden apply to join NATO, that this should be the matter that the administration should be focusing on and trying to find some way through Turkey's issues ought to be the priority. Well, there we are, an administration that looks for fights with everybody, that is supplying weapons to Ukraine, that's bankrolling Ukraine, even as Ukraine becomes increasingly dependent upon the United States, but is never supplied with anything like sufficient numbers of weapons to win its war, which probably anyway, given how much more powerful Russia is almost certainly anyway unwinnable. And as I've already said, these Western weapon systems, it seems to me that they're really wonder weapons. They're kind of things that exist. Well, they exist in fact, but they exist even more in the imagination, and that I'm sure the real military people on the battle lines must be getting increasingly skeptical about them. So there we go. growing confrontation, growing international crises, a war that's going wrong in Ukraine. It doesn't seem to me as if the international situation is getting any better. That, it seems to me, is a further summary and update of the situation today. It does seem to me that Secretary Blinken, if he's to do his job, ought to be undertaking some diplomacy for a change, not striking poses about China. But there we go. An administration that clearly doesn't do diplomacy, a drifting situation, a situation that's going from bad to worse, and a war in Ukraine which is being lost and which will be another massive debacle. There it is. That's me for today. More from me soon, presumably tomorrow. Thank you for joining me again today. And just to repeat, you can find us on other platforms.